Intercultural protocol to negotiate the free trade agreement between Colombia and Korea. The best way to minimize the risks for a negotiation with other countries is to have accurate information that allows us international negotiators to know in detail how their culture is, which protocols should be handled in terms of communications, customs, talks, beliefs, and goals to achieve. What is a protocol for an international negotiation? Since 2009, Colombia and Korea decided to agree on an international negotiation of both nations, which included essential aspects to be negotiated and the structure of the negotiations, in this case, a national government negotiating team with its Korean counterpart. It is important to note that negotiations with the Koreans, since the intercultural protocol is oriented by aspects such as 1. Negotiations with Koreans are a bit slow. So this international negotiation was for 5 years and 9 months, since within their culture they did not apply the process a little fast. 2. The hierarchical level of negotiations within the intercultural protocol must be given to the same level of the other part. In this case of the Colombia, we have a negotiating team designated by the government to develop this process and following the protocol. 3. In every negotiation, one must know the culture, the intercultural protocols of the other part, and must be framed in a common interest for both parties. For both parts. 4. For both Colombia and Korea, the negotiations took place in local and neutral venues, which marked an equality of proportions during this process, which were in Colombia, Korea, and neutral third country as United States. Knowing culture of Korea is very important for negotiation. Here some important informations. Its imports of goods totaled $323 billion in 2009. Key investor in the world is $170 billion stock from 2003 to 2009. In Latin America, $10 billion from 2003 to 2009. South Korea are located in East Asia, has an area of more than 100 square kilometers, a population of more than 50 million of people, is in the 27th position of the population table, composed of 196 countries, and has a high population density with 505 inhabitants per square kilometer. If the reason for visiting South Korea is business, it is useful to know that South Korea is in the 5th place of the 190 that make up the ranking doing business, which classifies countries according to the easy they offer to do business. Is the first power in shipbuilding. Besides, is within the 5 powers in construction of cars, mobile telephony, and steel. Their literacy rate is 100% and 80% of young people have access to university education. A young Korean devotes his time between 15 and 16 hours to education, ranked first with Finland in the PISA education report. It is necessary to know about history of Korea, although it's very hard, is even amazing. In 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea, which lasted until 1953. There participated troops of the United Nations, USA, China, and Battalion Colombia. By 1953, 80% of the economy was destroyed, 3 million dead, 70% of the construction made ruins, which produced famine and disease. For 1960, Korea became the poorest country in the world. Nowadays, it is one of the countries with the best economy in the world. In Korea, there is a high diversity of religions. Therefore, it can generate inconvenient situations if it is not known to give a correct handling in a relation. The initial greeting is a tilt of the head and shaking hands and supporting the left hand on the shoulder can build confidence in the other part. When we are talking with Korean, it's better. Don't not refers to words. Don't not compare with the Japanese. The best topics to talk about are soccer, the success of your economy. Koreans are usually very humble. Gifts are common practice. Business lunch and dinners are common. Do not give away something Korean or Japanese, rather something of our culture. Gifts are not opened in the presence of the gift. The time of the negotiations in the Korean market. The most appropriate form is with a government authorized commercial agent. The negotiation teams should be similar to the other part. The status is very important to advance this process. The commitments are not easy to acquire, but once they give their words, they maintain and generate confidence. Make sure you understand your exhibits well. Do not be surprised if you ask several times. Do not be aggressive or lose your nerves when negotiating. An ambitious initial offer is considered to have a margin of negotiations. No modifications allowed. Negotiations can go slow, but once they close, the implementation comes in a quick way. Doing business. At the time of negotiations, we must take into account the following about Koreans business. Took negotiators. They apply to business the ethical principles of Kenshu Code, which establish that commitments are only acquired when the other part has demonstrated its reliability. The initial offers should be quite far from what is expected to be achieved in the end, so that the two parts improve their positions substantially in the course of the negotiation. They are the most direct Asian negotiators, individualist and in the behaviors and decisions. Negotiations tend to be repetitive. Koreans ask the same question several times to make sure the decisions they make are correct. Slow in decisions, but once the negotiation is achieved, they seek its implementation very fast, inflexible. Korean entrepreneurs are very respectful with the agreement, do not allow change to clauses. Other tips for negotiating with Koreans. In the Asian populations, the word is of great value. Therefore, before committing yourself, be clear with the commitments you assume and make sure that you can meet them, as well as the validity times that are set. This market offers stability to the extent that the Korean businessman prefers to do long-term business. He is usually very knowledgeable and skillful when it comes to negotiating. He is also reliable and fulfilling. That is why the employer is recommended to prepare very well and carry the largest amount of information of your company and products written in English. Respect of hierarchicals is important in South Korea culture and in general in Asia. It is recommended to be clear who will represent the purchasing company, to include a person of the same rank in your negotiating team. In this same sense, it is essential to bear in mind that when spoken in English, they are offended if a subordinate or a younger person names them. Most Koreans do not feel comfortable speaking English. To create a closer relationship, we recommend investing in a speaking Spanish Korean translator. Age defines the form of language used and who speaks first. Although not so strict for the foreigner, it is possible for them to ask about their age and material and marital status. Business cards must be delivered with your right hand or with both hands, and when you receive it, do not store it immediately, never in your pants pocket, and do not write on it. In Korean, names first, the last name is written, the generational name and the proper name. Bring your business card in English. Korean, Koreans are very punctual and try to be before the agreed time. If you have an inconvenience when arriving early, do not hesitate to let us know, as well as specifying a specific future date to meet again. How to develop a strategy to reach an agreement in an intercultural negotiation? Taking into account the importance of Korea for our nations, establishing a negotiation strategy on both sides favors economic interest in terms of opportunities that can be derived from a free trade agreement with South Korea. The nature of the negotiation in this free trade agreement of Colombia with Korea, and as a result of an initiative as it expressed in this book, shall accuse, must be defined three basic questions. First one, in the light of our interests, as the other part would interpret my actions and declarations? In this negotiation of this treaty, the government assigned a negotiation group with the other part. It should be emphasized that this negotiation process is immersed in some rounds where both parts demonstrate their own interest to benefit both economies. Second one, what strategies, tactics, and actions the other part would respond to my statements and actions? As it is known to both parts, prepared in a negotiation process, in the case of Korea, that is economy with a good purchasing power. The methodology of negotiations is between the two negotiations groups for which one of the parts presents the requirements and the other decides whether or not accept what is proposed. Third one, how to respond to these reactions from the other negotiations part? Any response should be prepared with detailed analysis of why it is argued that a position to be implemented by the other part will decide whether to accept or not and will let him know in a time in which determined by the pace of negotiations. In the course of negotiations, that what advanced between both nations is vital to determine 5 points which Salacus refers to, which are priorities. Negotiating a free trade agreement with Korea is of the utmost importance for our nations, as it serves as a platform for reaching trade agreements such as Singapore and Japan, with the latter advancing a theme of protection and promotion of investments. For Colombia, it is vitally important to have an internationalization strategy with that country, as it is a very significant learning that opens the door to the great Asian market. Two, alternatives. As for the alternatives, we have on the one hand that products or service we can have comparative advantage. The other part also has its own interest in the nations. As we have said, is a mutual benefit that seeks to establish for both economies to be strengthened and can generate greater economic growth. It should be noted that within the intentions of the national government is to implement an office in Seoul to support Colombian exporters. Third, benefits. Access to a new international market, greater opportunities for our entrepreneurs in a nation that has very good purchasing power. Establish a strategic alliance with important companies in Korea that can transmit their technology, attract investors, and impact on employment generations. The purchases will have a tariff reduction. Fourth, costs. The negotiation took place in 3 years and 5 months. In fact, this generates economic costs in the same process. Meetings, lobby, economic studies. For some analysts, the trade treaty is unbalanced due to the industrial developments of these countries. We can say that small and medium-sized enterprises can suffer in the first years, but this makes them more productive. Another cost that we must assume is the learning of entry to the Asian market, which is one of the most of the world. 5. Implementations. The Free Trade Agreement was signed in February this year. It is vital to note that both parliaments must approve it, and the periods of relief are between 5 and 10 years for goods and services produced in our economy. Protocols and strategies as international negotiators in Korea. Negotiations take time. We must prepare ourselves to know what we can of their culture. At this point, it is very important to go to and learn from institutions facilitating international trade such as Ministry of Industry and Commerce, AUN, Embassy of Colombia in Seoul, Embassy of Korea in Colombia. As representatives of a company, negotiators must know the business culture of the other part. The language we can handle in a negotiation is Korean or English, as many of its inhabitants handle it in business transactions. Conclusions of the cultural protocol in international negotiation. Knowing the culture to negotiate is key when establishing business relations with Korea. It's important for the international negotiator to be aware of the key components of the cultures of the other part to which it will have to adapt, especially if it has less bargaining power. These are fundamentally of the following: time use, personal professional relationships, socio-professional status, argumentation techniques, concessions and agreements, and decision making among others. The international executive who moves to negotiate these countries will have to know very well the business culture of the other part and adapt if it wants to be successful in the negotiations that it carries out. Since if we are well prepared, we know how to approach such strategy from the outset will be easier to carry out a process where the two parties generate mutual benefits. Companies are one of the most important agents in the conduct of international business. They contribute to the development and strengthening of commercial relations between countries and as a main strategy for the fulfillment of its objective is the knowledge of the cultures and of the main economic indicators that allow to have a global vision of the behavior of a country. Knowledge of the subject to be negotiated and knowledge of the culture to be dealt with are dispensable when negotiating. Latins have lost opportunities for improvisation and lack of adequate knowledge of the key points that are required when negotiating both the culture and the topic to be dealt with that can generate conflicts between both parts and adversities that force to bear the objectives of an international negotiation. Finally, Colombia is a country that has a series of resources and characteristics that would allow it to have a higher level of competition internationally, such as natural wealth, geographical location, etc. However, its problem is achieving a successful international lies in two main aspects. The first is the lack of discipline when conducting negotiations supported by unpunctuality, improvisation, emotions, among others. The second aspect is the lack of credibility on the part of individuals and organizations on the strategies to be implemented to achieve the objectives. Taking into account the above, it is imperative that the creation of an attitude towards change imposed by globalization.